Today, I would request Dr. Payal Nagpal to particularly talk about the text, which is, of course, indicative of the sensibility of the ideas that existed in the 18th century. So, without further ado, I would request Dr. Payal Nagpal to please give her comments.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. And you're absolutely right. When you say that in a way, Swift is the maker of prose, because before this, if we look at it, at least in the field of literature, I think Swift really kind of develops this area, which is what in a sense leads to the development and complete evolution of the English novel 18th century onwards.
You read the word, you used the word creative. Yes. So do you refer to the fantasy mode in this text, which is very creative?
Yes, the fantasy mode and the travel mode. I think these are two things that go hand in hand in this particular text. And so when we, even when we look at the title is called Gulliver's Travels, or Travels into Several Remote Nations of the World in 4 parts. So I think this is, and it's very interesting to mark how a very early form of the novel is something that is written in the form of a fantasy travel account. But he makes very good use of all the kind of ideas and tropes that are available to him in the context of travel. So I think this is also the text needs to be looked at from this perspective also.
I have more questions to ask, but that will happen later. So
yes,
you may give your initial comment.
Yes. So if we look at the title, as I mentioned, that it talks about how this is a kind of travel account, and the author is Lemuel Gulliver, first a surgeon and then a captain of several ships. It's important to see how a distinction is being made between Swift as author and the projected author, that's Gulliver. So we have to keep these layers in a sense in mind. So I think one of the things that's always been done vis-a-vis Gulliver's Travels is that one has looked either at the last part or one has looked at the 4 different parts. But today I think we also will be looking at the text in terms of the letters that are written right at the beginning and connect them with the last chapter actually in part 4. I think that will give us a fresh perspective into the novel. So when there is a letter from the publisher to Cousin Simpson, and then there is a letter from Gulliver to Cousin Simpson where Gulliver is saying that you or your interpolator ought to have considered that it was not my inclination. So was it not decent to praise any animal of our composition before my master Houyhnhnms? When I formerly hinted to you something of this in a letter, you were pleased to answer that you were afraid of giving offence, that people in power were very watchful over the press and apt not only to interpret but to punish everything which looked like an innuendo. So in the letter, he's talking about the truth value of the account. He's talking about how certain parts had been kind of done away with, and he introduces the significance of part 4. And right at the beginning in this letter that is kind of appended to the text, we see how the debate between the Yahoos and the Houyhnhnms, and the Yahoos the equivalent of the human race, and the Houyhnhnms who are actually the horses and come from the animal kingdom, how this question of who is more civilized in a sense is already raised in this letter. So he says that but pray how could that which I spoke so many years ago, and he goes on in this strain to say that have not I the most reason to complain when I see these very Yahoos carried by Houyhnhnms in a vehicle as if they were brutes, and those the rational creatures. So he's already kind of expressing his displeasure at the connection that is there between the Yahoos and the Houyhnhnms. And then of course one moves into the text and we have the 4 different parts. But I think this is a satire, and so a prose satire, and what Swift is doing is, in these letters, of course, the whole projection of the author and the making of the text. At the same time, I think what is very significant and what needs to be noted is how he's also giving us a perspective right at the beginning from which to, really speaking, look at and interpret the entire text. So the mention of the Yahoos, of the Houyhnhnms, tells us how this is something that we need to keep at the back of our minds when we actually begin with the different levels and layers that are presented to us through the novel. So it has to be read against the backdrop of these comments that appear in the letter that is written by Gulliver to Simpson. At the same time, we have to keep in mind that the book is divided into 4 parts, and the part that is referred to in the letter is the last part. And the first part is, of course, the journey to Lilliput. The second is to the island of Brobdingnag. The third is to the island of Laputa. And finally, we have a journey to the country of the Houyhnhnms. So, if we look at this, what is the kind of, we need to ask, early 18th century, I mean, it's published around 1726. So, what is the structure that we are looking at? What is this work that we are looking at? Is it a prose writing? Is it fiction? Can we call it a novel? I think these are questions that we need to ask. And again, the point that was made right at the beginning is that travel here is, the fact that a combination of 3 things. 1, the prose form. 2, the fantasy aspect, adventure aspect, and the third is the travel aspect. I think these 3 kind of combine in a sense to present to us, the early form of the novel. So we also will be looking at the significance in a sense of these 4 books and its concerns about humanity. And then I think the question that we really speaking need to ask is that critics have often said that there is a rejection in a sense of humanity. Is it a rejection, or is it a satire that allows us to actually interrogate, to ask the problems that beset the human race? So here I'd request Professor Prakash also, before we begin our journey into book 1, to share his comments about Gulliver's Travel as an early novel.
So. No, you see, what struck me as you were talking about the 18th century is that the person is a satirist. The person has to criticize something in his surroundings, and also there is a reason behind it. That's how I look at the text as well as the author. That the person comes from Ireland.
Yes.
And Ireland has always been at the receiving end of English oppression, English exploitation, and the person, the writer who is sensitive enough to understand the insults that are regularly hurled at the Irish people at that time onwards, that has been happening till today. So he is that way basically angry, and he is using, in my opinion, and I hope you would agree with me, anger gives rise to satire. Because the writer uses words, the writer is not happy with the humbug that surrounds him in the form of the oppression of the English people, and therefore he gives vent to that anger through the use of words. You also, in the middle of your discussion, brought in this word innuendo. That's not direct. The language is looking this way and that way, and what is being conveyed directly is totally different from what is actually being suggested. So he's a maker of prose. I'm glad you agree, because he's using his sentences that way. There are long sentences. In the middle of it, the innuendo comes, and then there is a tone, and the word that you used, that particularly intrigued me in the positive sense. That the person seems to be anti-humanity, and that is showing in the book and all. And at the same time, it's a fairy tale. It's a book that generally we prescribe for the school going students. So on the one side you have the school going student level explanation, communication, and at the other end you as you rightly say, it's the rejection of all that the person confronts.
Yes.
So, what is your comment on this?
Yes, I completely agree that, I mean, to take each of these points, that first of all, of course, it is, as I mentioned, a prose satire. So he is very angry, and I think the anger also needs to be looked at in terms of, like you said, Swift's personal life, his early inclination towards the Whigs, the shift to the Tories, and then from there too there is kind of disillusionment, and I would say that's when his move to Ireland, I think that is he keeps waiting for a long time for his preferment to happen, and that really speaking doesn't. So I think there is disillusionment in him vis-a-vis the people that he sees around him and the way they behave and the promises that are made to him and are never kept. So I think that also kind of, he takes it from the individual to actually the social level to really speaking ask these questions. And yes, this is of course a very important point of discussion, his attitude towards humanity, his attitude also in a sense, actually, I don't know if we'll have the time, but the way women are presented, for instance, in the work. So these are important areas of concern. So when we take a look at book one, it's the narrative is simple compared to what we have later. There is a degree of complexity in book 3 and book 4. It's more at the level of the idea, but books 1 and 2 particularly would really appeal, especially to the school-going student. And it's done very simply, where in one case, there is he's how things are relative. So in book 1, where he's supposed to be absolutely gigantic compared to the Lilliputians, who are all just about 6 inches in size, and then you move on to book 2, where he's the whole thing is reversed. I think this also tells us about the way in which Swift is also kind of building up the construct of a satire, of making it kind of a more a wide-ranging lens with which we look at things, and how there is a shift of perspective. What appears to be big in one case is something that turns out to be absolutely the reverse. So books 1 and 2 actually also need to be looked at in this context at the very literal level, in terms of what is the kind of perspective that we really speaking need to evolve. So Gulliver's of course presented as a surgeon who undertakes the journey, and very early he uses the money is used for navigation, it's used for mathematics. Now the important point here is that when we the use of money for navigation, for mathematics, I think these are two things that are very, very central to the English society, especially 16th century onwards. The whole idea of the building of the empire through travel, I think that is a very important area, and that's kind of hinted at presented very clearly in these books. So for instance, if you look at it, he lands in the island of Lilliputians, his gradual rise in stature, where he becomes the Nardoc. There is the battle with the king of Blefuscu, and there is a fire, and how he puts out the fire when he urinates, and his final escape from the island of the Lilliputians. So, but it is within this story that he uses a different context, the context of a fantastic context, estranged by distance and imagination, to comment on England of the times, and the story of the high-heeled and the low-heeled. Again, the whole battle between the Tories and the Whigs, the whole idea of the breaking of the egg. Do you break it from the larger end or the smaller end? Now it points towards, it's a satire. So it is, one is of course the literal level at which the fantasy is being built, but the larger level in which we really need to look at book 1 is the very, very inane ways, reasons because of which there are these there are battles and there are wars, and he's pointing towards that. So and to quote him, so he's when he lands there, he's just very, very surprised that he sees somebody advancing gently, he says, towards him, and somebody came up almost up to my chin, he says. So it tells us that at one level, of course, he's thinking about the size of these people. At the other level, when he says, in this empire, under the names of Tramixan and Slamixan, from the high heel and the low heels of their shoes by which they distinguish themselves, that people are kind of distinguished on these on the basis of the heels that they wear. So which means that social hierarchy, in a sense, is again based on things that do not, really speaking, make sense and appear irrational. And irrationality and the way it is presented is important, because going back to the letter written right at the beginning, by Gulliver to Simpson, and connecting it with book 4, the importance of reason and rationality, I think that is something that's again kind of brought out here. So,
May I say something here?
Yes.
In the context of the first book, I feel, and I do so because of your description, that Englishman is planning to go out somewhere, to assert himself, to know the world from his angle, and that it's an image of the Englishman himself. He is so big that everything else looks small to him. And in order to remove the doubt between the Englishman and the author, the writer is using another character. So you said very clearly in the beginning that there are two authors. One author is Swift himself, and the second author is Gulliver. And Gulliver, as an independent author, as if let loose on the world, is a person who is looking at the whole world from his perspective, and he is not able to relate to. He is astounded. He is feeling very superior. He thinks the world is just for him to be used, and all those things. So in a way, it starts with that kind of satiric tone.
yes.
So would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Because the point here that I think Swift is making is that the whole idea, again, mathematics and travel, navigation, the way he spends, I mean, money is so very important, the one thing that he's carrying with him. It also tells us about the rise of a class of people that are going to become very important in the 19th century. So I think this group that gained mobility, Renaissance onwards, I think this is a group that's now also consolidating itself, and this group is kind of traveling, and by kind of, if we look at these two books in tandem with each other, so I think this idea of satirizing size itself is it undercuts the Englishman and his desire, his thirst for travel, and of discovering, so to say, new areas, because the discovery is entirely from the point of view of the Englishman. It's not as if these places did not exist. So this travel into these new places is part of the entire colonial enterprise, and I think by kind of totally reversing the size from book 1 to book 2, I think he's making a point about this.
At the same time, there is an important figure in the 18th century writing that is called Picaro, and in fact you talked about it once. So this person is a Picaro and not a Picaro. In one sense, he is a Picaro. He is an adventurer. He goes and sees things. At the same time, this person is being shown rather than he is seeing things.
Yes.
And that way there is a comment on the Picaro.
Yes. I think that, especially when we talk about Fielding, we do, use the word Picaro. We also talk about the picaresque novel. But I think here, this, the very figure of the protagonist itself, and the protagonist is the Englishman, I think that itself is being, just satirized in the first two books. And by the time we reach book 4, I think that is completely, I mean, absolutely cut to sizes, what it is, or rather totally almost rejected in a sense, in favor of the Houyhnhnms. So, absolutely true. So again, in this book, it's very important to also kind of see the bewilderment of, the king, for instance, at the fact that he was supportive of somebody who had, not been loyal to a person that he had. There was a breach of trust, and the emperor thought it monstrous. He says, the emperor thought it monstrous in me to offer as a defense the greatest aggravation of the crime. And he says that in this place, ingratitude is a capital crime. So this, I think, and his complete description of the place of Lilliput is done in a very careful manner, where here too he is bringing out the distinction about how the cottagers and the laborers are, they keep their children at home and the way in which they function. So we get to see the different levels at which life functions, but again it is the perspective of the Englishman, and that in itself is being satirized through the body, through the functions of the body, as well as this reference to the size of the people.
So friends, in this lecture Dr. Payal Nagpal has introduced the text, and she has given the format to us. It's a 4-part book, and the first part lays bare the pattern that will emerge later, and Swift is coming out in this particular part as a kind of critic, as a kind of angry person, a satirist, and who exposes the hypocrisies, the contradictions that lie at the heart of the Englishman. This is a beginning of the reading of the text, and we can of course go from here further. Thank you.